I've been a board member of the Charity Commission since 2014. I also chair their Audit and Risk Committee. My professional background was as a chartered accountant. I was an audit partner with KPMG, primarily dealing with the banking world. I'm now a non-executive director at Barclays. So I know what it's like to be in a regulated sector. My last role at KPMG was actually, I was responsible for the quality and risk management within the firm, indeed our European firm. So I'm also very aware of the need to preserve reputation, which in my view involves both doing and being seen to do the right thing, and also being transparent and accountable when things go wrong. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Transparency and accountability, the importance for charities. Both are essential ingredients, I think, of earning trust, and trust does have to be earned. Trust itself is essential for charities, indeed other large organisations, to operate. It might be self-evident, but I have to say it's not clear that the concepts are always well understood, or if understood, well lived. Today's seminar is actually quite timely. Some of you may be aware we've just produced, the Charity Commission has just produced our biennial survey on public trust and confidence in charities. As the accompanying press release to that actually said, transparency is not enough. Charities need to demonstrate authenticity to rebuild trust. So what do I mean by transparency? I think it's about letting your shareholders, your stakeholders, know about the charity's activities, including the difficulties, including, as Mark indicated earlier, what the risks are that you're considering. You need to provide clear factual information about the financial position of the charity, the context in which it is operating, the geography in which it is operating, and most importantly, the difference that you make. You need to be open about the people who work for you and what they do. Accountability, slightly differently I think, means accepting responsibility for what the charity does, or in some cases doesn't do. Being able to justify your use of resources, whether they're financial or other resources, such as human resources. And that's where the trustees are responsible. They're responsible for setting the strategy, oversight of the management in executing that strategy, and for monitoring performance, including outcomes. Trustees are ultimately accountable for what the charity has achieved or failed to achieve. By being seen to accept that accountability and demonstrating that accountability, you can also help demonstrate the charity's authenticity. Some of you, I hope, will have read the Charity Governance Code for larger charities. There's a similar one for smaller ones. But the larger one, I think, is worth a read, even if you don't think it directly applies to you. Because I think the principles are very transportable. And Principle 7 is all about openness and accountability. If you haven't read it, I commend it to you. I said that we just produced the biennial survey. I was going to give you, if you can make that out just about, you don't need to read the bits on the slide necessarily, but you can certainly see the graph. The graph dipped in 2016 quite significantly. It is dipped very slightly again, although I have to say the decrease is largely down to methodological variations rather than a drop in trust, but it's certainly not getting any better. And as in previous surveys, when the survey respondents were asked what were the factors that are important to building trust and confidence, they said they wanted charities to make a positive difference to the cause they're working for, ensure that a reasonable proportion of donations make it to the end cause, that they're well managed, that its fundraisers are honest and ethical, and they make ethical decisions to further the cause that they work for. And the drivers are pretty well evenly weighted, although there's been some interesting shift in focus this year, which I'll come on to in a minute. But one of the things I think it's important to understand in looking at this survey is what do people think is a charity? Because that guides the answers to the question about public trust and confidence. And that again was interesting, because we asked that question this time round. And this infographic is showing the unprompted response we obtain when people ask, what do you think is a charity? The larger the typeface, the more often it is mentioned. And whilst there are clearly some traditional favourites in there, there's a heavy focus, as you'll see, on some of the medical charities, children, some of the animal charities. Oxfam, you'll see, has got the highest profile in there, which is interesting because it's significantly different from where it was in 2016, where Oxfam featured, but in much smaller typeface. And I think what that shows you is that it's the old adage, news travels fast, but bad news travels faster. You've got to say that Oxfam is there, not because of the charitable work that it was doing, but for the bad publicity that it was getting. And that bad publicity then relays onto the rest of the sector. As you know, in February we saw the exposure of the misbehaviour of our aid workers. It was a story that developed over time. So it went from revelations about safeguarding incidents, including those taking place many years earlier, to further stories about the handling of malpractice by senior management. And one of the themes that we have seen at the Commission is a lack of openness about what actually happens in charities and the ways in which charities have addressed the issues when they first arose. In addition to lapses in conduct and how they were addressed, what we saw was a tendency for less disclosure than was needed. Stories came to light over time. It became progressively harder and harder to address the issues, and the impact on public confidence was greater. Again, as it so often happens, whilst initial events may be bad, any attempt to cover up or perceived lack of openness and willingness to accept that mistakes have been made just compound the problem and make it far worse. I've seen that demonstrated in spades in my own profession, where the demise of Arthur Anderson was not caused by poor auditing, but by a criminal indictment for what was construed by the authorities as an attempt to cover up. Interestingly enough, that indictment was subsequently thrown out by the courts, but not before Anderson's had gone bust. The ultimate Pyrrhic victory, unfortunately. I couldn't resist a couple of quotes about transparency, one of which I suppose is deeply philosophical and the other of which is much more prevalent, much more apposite in terms of the charities. So the first one, which is the philosophical one, again, it might be regarded as a truism, but I do think it does get forgotten. A lack of transparency is, in itself, breeds distrust. You don't need to have done something wrong. If you just perceive to be not transparent, it builds distrust. Particularly for the large charities, I have to say. They need to work much harder at it. There's a natural barrier between those people on the inside, in the know of a large charity, and the stakeholders, which is caused by a lack of personal relationship. Indeed, the underlying survey results that we have, which support the biennial survey, show that small charities, which can rely much greater on that personal interaction, are much more trusted than the large ones. But nonetheless, it's an issue which I think the sector as a whole can't ignore, and any reasonably sized charity certainly can't. And I also like Stuart Etherington's comment, because I do think that the sector as a whole needs to look at transparency not as a way of avoiding the negative, but to actually build on the positive. It's something that you should be advancing. I said that we would look at how the factors were in terms of importance to trust this time around. This is this year's survey. 2016 demonstrated a positive difference. Came out top. As you can see, that's now dropped to 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth place. Now it's being transparent about where the money goes that's taken to top slot. I have to say, and this is a personal view, I think in part that's because it's the only one of those factors that actually listed the word transparent in it, although transparency arguably applies to all of them. But I do think there's a point at which people just say, well, we want people to be transparent. And certainly we do know that from the focus groups we held back in 2016, participants talked about a perceived lack of progress on many of the causes charities fight for, and a lack of feedback from charities explaining what they've done with donations. And when the public feels less certain where the money went, they say that charities must not only do good work, but seem to make a positive contribution by effectively communicating their achievements. The Commission clearly has a role to play in helping charities to be transparent. This is a slightly busy slide, which I don't propose to go to in a lot of detail, but collecting information from charities is one of our strongest regulatory tools. Broadly speaking, we gather two types of information: essential details about a registered charity, example, what its name is, where it operates, who the trustees are, etc. And then additional information about how it operates, which helps us to understand the registered charity sector better and to identify particular characteristics which might mean that the charity is at risk in some way. We ask questions about policies, as risks, for example, fundraising, government funding, trustee payments, financial controls, and we ask more information from the larger charities. Over the last few years, this has been focused entirely on what we've called the annual return or AR process. We would ask charities to submit their annual return alongside what we called a view amend service, which is how they would update the details, including names and contact details of trustees, etc. From this year, providing we can get the digital services up and operating successfully, and there are some contingency plans if they don't kick in initially in October when it's intended. But the process is going to be different. We're going to be offering two completely new digital services. One, update charity details, and the other one is the annual return. The update charity details is something where we're going to be encouraging charities to use that continuously throughout the year. So in other words, keep our information up to date, please. And one of the things we are looking to do there, and it's a point that just picking up on what Mark was saying about the new trustee guidance that we've got, one of the things we are trying to do is to get email addresses for trustees as part of our refresh of charity details, with a view to the fact that we can now start to target communications at trustees of particular types of charity, or indeed new trustees when they come on board. We can send them the information back. We're not relying on an induction process within the charity. So we are trying to be smarter at the way we work there. And that update charity detail service, as I say, gets used throughout the year. The annual return then is going to be separate, but in that system, charities are not going to be able to file until they've confirmed that they have actually updated their details. So it will be a separate process, but you need to confirm that you have actually gone through and done it. To use the dreaded phrase GDPR, one of the reasons I have to say for introducing is it helps us comply with GDPR because it means there are no personal details anymore in the annual return. They're kept separate. We're also looking to make the annual return itself smarter, and that's what this slide is designed to illustrate, by asking questions which are pertinent to the charity. So in other words, if from your details it is clear you do not operate overseas, we won't ask you questions about operating overseas. If you do public fundraising and you do use a fundraising professional fundraiser, then there will be questions asked about your relationship and the contract with that professional fundraiser. A lot of the information we gather, and this is where I think it helps the charities be transparent, and the annual accounts is a clear one, obviously goes onto our public register. That is incredibly widely used. It had over 13 million hits in 2016-17. So don't think just because stuff goes there, it's then ignored. It isn't. People do look at it. The other thing I wanted to talk about was public benefit reporting by charities. Obviously, the annual report and accounts themselves, and in particular the trustee report, is an important part of a charity's communication with stakeholders. And for the larger charities, not necessarily all the small ones, it's filed with the Commission, available through the register. There are legal requirements for those documents, rules about the accounts, about what must be included in the trustee's annual report. It doesn't mean that charities always get it right. Our own research, when we looked at accounts which were adequate, showed that, and this picks up a little bit on earlier themes, only 3/4 actually met the most basic standards. There is work to be done there. But I also wanted to focus on public benefit, because the trustee report can be used to demonstrate what the charity has achieved, what it's set out to do, whether it achieved the impact it intended. Far too often we find that the reporting is about the actions and activities the charity undertook rather than the impact or the outcomes that resulted. And I think that the charities can use it a lot better as an opportunity to promote their work. We know that the public want to hear about what charities are achieving, and there's a way message can be given. And the requirement for reporting on public benefit in trustee reports is there. It's a legal requirement. But as this slide shows, it's not in a great state. That's one little piece of it. And I think, in some ways, part of it, perversely, I think, is because it's a legal requirement. People see it as a compliance requirement. It's a tick box checklist that they need to tick off. And I think we need to try and change that mindset. It should not be viewed as a compliance checklist. This is an opportunity for the charities to demonstrate to the public and to build that public trust and confidence in what they're doing. As Mark also noted, the SORP committee is starting to think about changes to the SORP, although I have to say I think any new SORP is going to be about 3 years off or so at least. But interestingly, in that context, Nigel Davis, who heads up the Accounting Services Unit at the Commission, and his counterpart at the Scottish regulator, published an article recently which was quite interesting because it did raise this issue of whether public benefit should be much more of the focus of the annual report and accounts. And the accounts, not just the annual report, and get away a little bit from some of the more mechanistic things that the SORP accounting currently does. The other thing that I would encourage is reporting significant instances, which is not what this is, but I'm going to come on to this one in a minute. We do expect charities to report serious incidents to us promptly. I would stress that it should not be seen as a threat, and I think there may be one or two lawyers in the area, but I know from personal experience that the legal advisors to charities can take a very legalistic view of whether there is a strict requirement to report, because almost it's seen as the last resort. You shouldn't tell the Charity Commission anything that you don't absolutely have to. I'd encourage you not to think of it that way. The Commission doesn't overreact to reports. 9 times out of 10, probably more than that actually, you will get a letter back from the Commission which merely indicates they're comfortable, the trustees know what they're doing and please get on with it. But it is a way for the trustees to demonstrate to us that they are complying with their duties. And it does give the Commission the opportunity to provide advice if that's what seems to be needed at the time. And it does give the opportunity for the trustees to explain the charity's position. The last thing that we at the Commission want to do is to read about an incident to charity in the newspaper that we don't know about, because all that does is undermine our confidence in the trustees of that charity. You'll be aware of the requirements around serious incident reporting, or hopefully you are. I have to say, it does occasionally, I do occasionally wonder whether this is a commonly known feature within the charity world. My wife is actually a district commissioner for the Scouts, and I occasionally have to remind her that most of the Scouts units that she deals with are registered charities, and they also have RSI responsibilities. Clearly, the significant risk is charities' money in assets, damage to charity property, beneficiaries or reputation, and beneficiaries has obviously been a large focus recently. We are concerned that there are significant underreporting of incidents to the Commission. We often find in our casework that an incident could and should have been reported to us at a much earlier stage. In 2016-17, which is the last year I've readily got the statistics for, we had about just over 2,100 incidents reported to us. 55% of them related to safeguarding, 14% related to fraud, which interestingly enough, about a third related to internal fraud. So when Mark says charities are subject to fraud, yes they are, but don't always think it's going to be external. Regrettably, it is not. The reason I put this slide up here is because there is a similar requirement, not identical, but a similar requirement for auditors and independent examiners to report matters of material significance to us. And one of the matters that they're required to report to us is when they will have a modified audit or independent examiner's opinion. And it's one of the ones we can easily track, because when the accounts are subsequently filed, we can detect that there was a modified opinion, and we can go back and we can say, did they report to us? And if so, did they report to us on a timely basis? And regrettably, the answer was, in the time we did the survey, which admittedly was only shortly after the introduction of the requirement, was no, they didn't. It is an area we are working with the profession on to try and up the ante, I'm afraid, to ensure that that is done. But again, I would just say that we would not wish it to be the auditor and the independent examiner that we would wish to hear from first. If there's an issue in a charity, it would be the trustees that we would like to hear from first, with the auditor and the independent examiner hot on their heels. I've put a couple of slides in here, really, which are just references for things which I think you will find useful. What I was going to talk about as a backdrop to it is our developing approach to the regulation of charities. We're currently working on a new strategy at the Commission. Our current strategic plan, like most good organisations, we have a 3-year strategic plan, comes to an end later this year. We don't yet know what the outcome of that review is going to say, so I'm not going to be unveiling a new strategy to you tonight. I would like to refer briefly to a speech which our new chair, Baroness Stow, gave in April this year, shortly after her appointment. And she talked about her concerns about falling level of trust in charities in the light of revelations primarily around Haiti at that time. And she noted that although levels of public trust may be falling for many organisations, as I said before, for charities it's particularly important. Charities only exist because the public want them to. The Commission, I think, has a role to play in helping charities to deserve the trust of the public. We're not going to do that by being cheerleaders for charities, i.e. by representing charities to the public. Where we see our role is representing what the public interest is to you, the charities. And I think we can try and do that in a way which makes you understand what the public expect and help you to respond to it. We do that both through effective regulatory intervention when we see things going wrong, by carrying out a certain amount of targeted research and activities where we look at broader issues relevant to the sector, but by also closer engagement with charities, and I would encourage that at every opportunity. And not only with the charities directly, but also the professional bodies who work with the sector. And our aim in doing that is to ensure that our guidance does retain a relevance and be up to date. We are working on the guidance, I have to say. I think whilst a number of it, and thank you Mark for your kind comments earlier, a lot of it is good, I think it does suffer from the fact that in some places it overlaps, in some places it's been written by different people at different times, and we need to try and bring it together and make it more comprehensive, comprehensible, and indeed accessible, and we're looking at that as well. We'd like you to support our work by making sure that you're equipped with the knowledge you need and skills you need to operate effectively within the law. And we know, again, and I would encourage this amongst those of you who do it, that there's a lot of umbrella groups out there that you can work with in order to help obtain that knowledge. We'd ask you to participate in our consultations, because it's only by listening to you and hearing from you that we can help get our guidance and do a better job. As I said before, please report serious incidents to us. And the other thing is, if you do see what's going on, then I'd also ask you to report wider sector issues to us that you see. The other thing I was going to mention very briefly, and I don't have a slide on this one, is the whole issue around whistleblowing. Again, as you all know, we have a whistleblowing hotline where employees of charities can approach the Commission direct. The Charity Governance Code that I referred to earlier, one of the examples of best practice that it has under Principle 7 does require the board to have its own process in place for a charity in terms of encouraging openness and communication. And I have to say it's a slight surprise to me that even within quite a lot of large charities, and I wouldn't say this applies to the very small ones, but the large charities, they don't have their own whistleblowing arrangements. For a regulator to have whistleblowing arrangements that the regulatees do not have is actually, in my view, a failing. And I do know, from having spoken to some of the people at Public Concern at Work, which is itself a charity, which seeks to promote whistleblowing in charities, is an area that they're concerned about and keen to help in. So if any of you feel you're of a size where that might be a benefit, I'd encourage you to do that. That was my other slide. So, just in conclusion, I hope that I've managed to persuade you about the importance of transparency and accountability, even if you were already there. Hopefully, what I have demonstrated is that we're not always performing it adequately and getting it right, there's more that can be done. I think there's great opportunities for the sector to do more, and I'm very happy to participate in some Q&A.